An armed robber pointed his gun at the 51-year-old mechanic and told her to get on her knees. 15 seconds later, 2 of his partners were on the ground, and he was the one asking her a question. Grease under her fingernails. That's how Dale Whitfield judged a person's worth. And by that measure, Maureen Castillo never seemed to measure up, no matter how clean her work always turned out. "You sure you got this, Mo?" Dale said, watching her wrestle a torque wrench under the chassis of a Ford F-250. "That transmission job's heavy work. I could put Kenny on it." Maureen didn't look up. "Kenny's been here 8 months and still can't bleed a clutch line without making a mess of it. I've got this, Dale. Just saying. You're what, 52? 53? 51. And I'll flip this truck's whole drivetrain before lunch, same as I told you I would." Dale grunted and walked off toward the office, the same way he walked off from every conversation where Maureen proved him wrong. It didn't matter. He always came back a week later with the same doubt, dressed up in new words. Whitfield's Auto and Diesel sat off Route 9 outside Boonville, Missouri, a squat cinder-block building with 4 bays and a gravel lot that flooded every spring. Maureen had been working there 3 years, ever since she'd moved back to Missouri to help care for her mother before she passed. Nobody at the shop knew she'd spent 22 years in the Marine Corps. Nobody knew she'd been one of the first women to complete force reconnaissance training, back when half her command thought she'd wash out in the first week and the other half hoped she would. Nobody knew about Fallujah, or Helmand, or the 3 years she'd spent training foreign partner forces in places she still wasn't allowed to name out loud. To the men at Whitfield's, she was just Mo, older lady mechanic. Good with her hands, sure, but always a question mark hanging over her, always someone wondering if today was the day she'd finally admit the work was too much for her. She let them wonder. It was easier than explaining. Some things you carry alone because the alternative. Trying to make civilians understand what happened in rooms nobody talks about costs more than it's worth. The bad day started like any other. Wednesday, mid-morning, sun already baking the gravel lot. Maureen was 3 bolts into dropping a leaf spring when the bell over the shop door jingled twice, fast, followed by a voice that didn't belong in an auto shop at all. Flat, controlled, and entirely too calm for what it was saying. "Everybody down. Now. Hands where I can see them." Maureen's whole body went still before her mind caught up. Training did that. 22 years of it lived somewhere deeper than conscious thought, and it recognized the cadence of a real threat before her eyes even confirmed it. She eased out from under the truck, moving slow, and looked through the gap between the lift and a stack of tires. 3 men. 2 in the front office, 1 covering the bay doors, all 3 carrying. A shotgun on the nearest one, pistols on the other 2, movements that said they'd done this before, or at least trained for it seriously. Ski masks. Dale was on his knees behind the counter, hands raised, face gray with fear. Kenny was flat on the concrete near Bay 2, not moving. Outside, through the front windows, Maureen caught the reason. An armored transport truck, the kind that ran cash between banks and casinos along the interstate corridor, had pulled off the highway with engine trouble, smoke curling from under the hood, and rolled into the gravel lot for help. Its 2 guards stood outside near the truck, weapons drawn, pinned down by a 4th robber positioned behind an SUV parked at an angle to block the exit. This wasn't an auto shop robbery. This was a hijacking, and Whitfield's had just become the stage for it. "Get the driver in here," one of the masked men barked to the man outside. "We need him to open the back." Maureen's mind sorted the situation with cold, mechanical clarity. The same clarity that used to click into place before a raid. 4 hostiles. 3 inside, 1 out. 2 armed guards outside, currently neutralized by position, not by casualties. Good. That meant this could still end without anyone dying. 8 civilians inside the shop, herself included. Confined space. Narrow lanes between lifts, tool chests, and vehicles up on blocks. That confinement was death for an untrained person. It was a gift for her. She'd spent 2 years of her career doing exactly this, Close quarters work in exactly this kind of environment. Engine bays and cargo holds and the guts of ships, places where a rifle was too long and space was your only weapon. McMap instructors used to joke that Force Recon Marines could kill a man with a spark plug and a bad attitude. It wasn't entirely a joke. "Ma'am," I said, "hands up!" The nearest robber had spotted her, shotgun swinging toward the gap in the tire stack. Maureen raised her hands slowly, palms open, and stepped fully into view. "Easy. I'm coming out. Nobody needs to get hurt. Get on your knees. Now." She lowered herself down, deliberately slow, cataloging distance and angles the entire time, 6 feet to the man with the shotgun. A rolling tool cart between them, waist height, heavy enough to matter. Behind him, an air hose reel mounted on the wall, hose fully extended from her last job, the coupling still attached to a pneumatic torque gun resting on the workbench. She kept her eyes down, playing exactly the part they expected. An aging woman, scared, harmless. That was when the 4th man walked in from outside, dragging the armored truck's driver by the collar, and Maureen recognized the tattoo on his forearm before she registered anything else about him. A small eagle, globe, and anchor, faded and blue-green with age, inked in the unmistakably crude style of a shop near 29 Palms. He was former Marine, and judging by how he held that pistol. Comfortable, low-ready, thumb resting near the safety out of old habit. He hadn't forgotten his training either. He shoved the driver down next to Dale and turned, scanning the room, and his eyes caught on something at Maureen's collar. The small silver chain she always wore tucked under her coveralls, mostly out of habit, mostly because some things you don't take off even after you've buried the reasons for wearing them. A challenge coin had slipped loose from beneath her shirt during her fall to her knees. Second Force Reconnaissance Company. Not something you bought at a surplus store. Not something anybody outside the unit would recognize. The man's face changed. Not fear. Recognition. Confusion fighting against instinct. "Hey," he said, low, to nobody but her. "Where'd you serve?" Dale, kneeling 6 feet away, actually let out a short, disbelieving laugh despite the gun pointed at him. The kind of laugh that comes from a man who thinks he's just heard the punchline to the most absurd joke of his life. "She's a mechanic," he muttered, mostly to himself, still trying to process why an armed robber was asking his aging shop hand about her military service like it mattered. "I asked you a question," the robber said again, sharper now, stepping closer. "That's a recon coin. Where'd you serve?" Maureen looked up at him, calm, steady, and answered with the same flat honesty she'd have given any Marine. "Second Force Recon. 2 combat deployments, 1 advisory tour. Retired as a gunnery sergeant in 2019. The room went silent, except for the hum of the shop's fluorescent lights. "Bullshit," said the shotgun-wielding robber near her, but there was less confidence in it now. He glanced at his partner. "She's messing with you." The Marine-tattooed robber didn't answer. He was staring at Maureen the way a man stares at something that doesn't fit the world he thought he understood, and in that half-second of hesitation, that fatal half-second every instructor warns you about, Maureen made her decision. She'd spent 3 years letting Dale underestimate her because it was easier than arguing. She'd spent longer than that letting the whole world assume a 51-year-old woman with tired eyes and a mechanic's hands couldn't possibly be dangerous. None of that mattered anymore. 8 lives were in that room, and 4 armed men were seconds away from either walking out with a fortune in armored cash or leaving bodies behind to make sure nobody could identify them. She'd seen that calculation made before, in worse places than a Missouri auto shop, and she knew which way it usually broke once a robbery started running long. She moved. Her hand closed on the tool cart and shoved it hard into the shotgun robber's knees, buckling his stance exactly as she'd calculated, and in the same motion she was up and inside his guard, driving her palm into his jaw with the kind of economical, brutal precision that 18 years of training builds into muscle memory. The shotgun clattered free. She had it in her hands before he hit the floor. "Move, move, move," she barked at Dale and Kenny. Pure command voice, the voice of a gunnery sergeant who'd run patrol briefs in the dark for men whose lives depended on hearing her clearly the first time. And Dale, despite 3 years of doubting her, obeyed instantly and without question, scrambling behind the parts counter. The second inside man swung his pistol toward her. Maureen was already moving sideways behind the hydraulic lift's support column, putting 18 inches of solid steel between herself and his line of fire, and in the same breath she grabbed the pneumatic torque gun's hose off the workbench and swept it in a hard arc across his wrist as he came around the corner after her. It wasn't a knockout blow. It didn't need to be. It broke his grip and his focus for exactly the half-second she needed to close distance and put him on the ground with a strike to the side of his knee that folded the joint wrong. 2 down. 15 seconds had passed. The marine-tattooed robber hadn't fired. He stood frozen near Dale and the armored truck driver, pistol still in his hand but pointed at the floor, watching Maureen work with an expression somewhere between horror and something that looked almost like grief. "Your recon," he said again, quieter now, like he was trying to convince himself. "You're actually recon, and you're better than this," Maureen said, breathing hard, the shotgun trained on him now, but her voice still level. "Whatever unit you were in, whatever happened after you got out, this isn't the answer. Put it down." Outside, the fourth robber, still covering the armored truck's guards from behind the SUV, must have heard the commotion, because he stepped out from cover to look through the front glass. And that single mistake gave the 2 guards, no longer pinned, the opening they needed to drop him with controlled fire before he could bring his weapon back to bear. Inside the shop, the tattooed man's hand was shaking now. Maureen kept the shotgun steady, kept her voice steady too. "Whatever your Mose was, whatever you did over there, you didn't come home to end up dead on some auto shop floor in Missouri. Put the weapon down. I will not ask you twice." For 3 long seconds, nobody in the shop breathed. Then the pistol clattered onto the concrete, and the man dropped to his knees on his own, hands laced behind his head, the fight gone out of him entirely. The sirens arrived 4 minutes later. By then, Maureen had zip-tied both downed men with cargo straps from the parts shelf, kept the shotgun trained on the third, and talked the armored truck's driver through applying pressure to a graze wound on his own forearm, calm as if she were walking a nervous apprentice through changing a tire. Boonville PD swept in first, followed by county sheriff's deputies, followed. Because armored cash transports crossing state lines pull federal attention, by 2 FBI agents out of the Kansas City field office. One of them, a woman introduced as Special Agent Renata Boyle, took one look at how the scene had been secured, weapons cleared, subjects restrained, wounded stabilized, witnesses calm, and asked the responding officer a single question. "Who did this?" The officer pointed at Maureen, who was leaning against her tool cart, arms crossed, waiting to give a statement like she'd done this 100 times before. Because, in another life, she had. Agent Boyle studied her for a moment, then asked, quieter, almost like she already suspected the answer, "Ma'am, were you prior service?" "Marine Corps. 22 years. What was your Mose?" "Force Recon. 0321. Boyle's expression shifted, the particular recognition of someone who understood exactly what those 4 numbers meant, and she nodded slowly, the way people do when a puzzle finally clicks into a shape they should have seen from the start. Boyle took her statement there in the gravel lot, methodical and quick, the kind of interview that comes from someone who's done 1,000 of them and knows exactly which questions matter. When it was finished, she didn't walk away right off. She glanced toward the patrol car where the tattooed man sat cuffed in the back seat, staring at nothing, and something in her posture changed. Hesitant, almost reluctant, in a way federal agents rarely allow themselves to look. "Ms. Castillo, can I have a word?" Away from the others. Maureen followed her past the tow truck, now idling near the SUV, out of earshot of Dale and the deputies logging evidence. "I ran his information the second we ID'd him," Boyle said. Standard procedure, cross-reference military service, priors, known associates. His name's Travis Ledbetter. Served 6 years, Marine Infantry, then 2 years attached to an advisory detachment training partner forces overseas. She paused, watching Maureen's face carefully. 3rd Battalion, 4th Marines, 2015 through 2016. Advisory rotation. Ma'am, that overlaps with your file. Maureen felt something drop through her chest, slow and heavy, like a wrench slipping from greased fingers. What's his name again? Ledbetter. Travis Ledbetter. The name didn't come to her whole. It came in pieces. A private, 20 years old, hands too fast for his feet. A kid who couldn't keep his rifle sling from twisting, but could read terrain like he'd been born to it. She remembered writing him up for a meritorious page 11. She remembered telling his company commander, the boy had the eye for it, that he should go to sniper school, that she'd stake her name on him. She remembered, distantly, the pride of it, watching a scared, undersized kid turn into someone who moved with purpose because she'd pushed him to. I know him, she said quietly. I trained him, recommended him for further schooling myself. Boyle didn't say anything right away. She let the silence sit, professional courtesy for a gut punch she recognized, even if she'd never taken one exactly like it. His record after that tour is thin, Boyle finally said. Something happened. A disciplinary separation, sealed at the battalion level, never made it up to anything I can see clearly. I don't know what it was. Neither will you. Probably. Not today. But whatever it was, it happened after you left him. You vouched for a kid who earned it at the time, Miss Castillo. What came after wasn't yours to carry. Try telling that to the part of me that just watched him on his knees with a gun in his hand, Maureen said, and for the first time all morning, her voice wasn't steady. She looked over at the patrol car. Ledbetter hadn't moved, hadn't looked up, hands cuffed behind him, staring at the floorboard like a man already serving a sentence he'd handed down on himself. 20 years of training had just walked her through disarming 3 armed men in under a minute without her pulse changing. This, a scared boy she'd once believed in, grown into a man kneeling in a gravel lot. This was the first thing all day that actually shook her. I need to talk to him, Maureen said. Before you process him, just a few minutes. Boyle hesitated, the kind of hesitation that came from procedure rather than reluctance. That's not exactly standard. Neither is finding out the man you helped put on the ground once wore your fire team's colors. Maureen met her eyes. I'm not asking as a witness. I'm asking as the gunnery sergeant who signed her name under his in 2016. I owe him 5 minutes. He can decide what to do with them. Something passed over Boyle's face. Not approval exactly, but understanding. One professional recognizing what it cost another to ask plainly for something outside the rules. 5 minutes. I'll be standing right there. She walked Maureen over to the patrol car herself and said something quiet to the deputy standing watch, who nodded and stepped back a few respectful paces. Ledbetter looked up when the door opened, and whatever he saw in Maureen's face made something in his own crack open. The practiced blankness of a man trying to hold himself together, giving way all at once. Gunny, he said, and his voice broke on the single word. Travis. She crouched down at eye level with him, the way she used to crouch beside a young private who couldn't hit a target from prone without overthinking his breathing. Look at me, he did, and his eyes were wet, and 22 years of command presence was the only thing keeping her own voice level. I put my name on your page 11, she said. Told your co you had the eye for sniper school, meant every word of it. Whatever happened after I left that tour, I don't know it, and today's not the day I'm going to ask you for it. But I need you to hear this. You didn't ruin what I saw in you. You buried it under something, but it's still there. I watched you hesitate back in there. You had a clean shot, and you didn't take it. And that wasn't weakness, Travis. That was the part of you I trained, still fighting for control. His jaw worked, and it took him a moment to get words out. I didn't know how to ask anybody for help, Gunny. Didn't think there was anybody left who'd remember me as anything but this. I remember you as a scared kid who worked harder than anybody in that platoon to be worth something. That doesn't disappear because of one bad morning, no matter how bad it was." She held his eyes. "You've got a long road in front of you now, and it's going to be harder than anything I ever put you through in training. But you put that gun down on your own. Nobody made you. Hold on to that. It matters more than you think it does right now." He didn't answer, just nodded, tears finally spilling over, and Maureen reached out and gripped his shoulder once, hard, the same grip she'd have given any Marine of hers heading into something rough, before she stood and stepped back and let the deputy close the door. Boyle was watching her when she turned around. "You didn't have to do that." "No," Maureen agreed. "But I trained him to be someone. Whatever he became after I lost track of him, some part of that's still mine to answer for. Not the crime. That's his. But the man underneath it. I had a hand in shaping that, and I wasn't about to let him get processed into the system without hearing that somebody still saw it." By then, Maureen had zip-tied both downed men with cargo straps from the parts shelf earlier, kept the shotgun trained on the third, and talked the armored truck's driver through, applying pressure to a graze wound on his own forearm, calm as if she were walking a nervous apprentice through changing a tire. All before Boyle had ever pulled her aside. Now, with the scene fully secured and the ambulances loading up, Dale stood off to the side through all of it, watching the woman he'd spent 3 years quietly doubting give a clean, precise statement to federal agents, watching 2 paramedics carefully load the man with the Marine tattoo into a squad car instead of an ambulance, watching the whole terrifying morning resolve itself because of hands he'd once suggested might be too old and too tired for heavy work. When Agent Boyle finished coordinating with the sheriff's department and the tow crews cleared the lot, Dale finally came over, hat in his hands, looking about 10 years older than he had that morning. "Mo, He stopped, swallowed, tried again. "I've been telling you for 3 years you might not be cut out for the heavy jobs." "I remember." "I'm sorry." He said it plain. No dressing it up, no excuses tacked on to the end. "I had you figured wrong from the day you walked in here." Maureen allowed herself a small, tired smile. The first easy expression she'd worn all morning. "Most people do, Dale. I never much minded proving them wrong when it counted." She looked over at the ambulance, where the 4th man's fate was still being determined, then at the tattooed man now being driven off in the back of a patrol car, and something in her chest ached in a way the fight itself never had. "Whoever trained that man," she said, mostly to herself, "taught him better than this. Some people just lose their way after they take the uniform off. Nobody's there to catch them." She paused. "I try to be, when I can. Doesn't always take." Kenny, still pale from the whole ordeal, spoke up from behind the parts counter where he'd been hiding since the robbery began. "How'd you do all that? I mean, you're older than you expected, I know." Maureen picked her wrench back up off the ground where it had fallen, turned it once in her grease-stained hand, and looked toward the F-250 still waiting on the lift. "Some things don't leave you, Kenny. Doesn't matter how many years go by, or how many people decide you don't look the part anymore. Training like that becomes part of who you are. Just because a person's quiet about it doesn't mean it isn't there. And sometimes the people you trained don't stay who you hoped they'd become. But that doesn't mean you stop caring what happens to them." She walked back toward the truck, ready to finish the transmission job she'd started that morning, moving like a woman who had simply had an unusually eventful coffee break rather than just stopped an armed hijacking with her bare hands and a tool cart, and quietly said goodbye to a piece of her own history in the back of a squad car on her way there. Dale watched her go, then looked down at the challenge coin one of the deputies had bagged as evidence before returning it to her. Second Force Recon, tarnished silver, carried quietly under her collar for 3 years while an entire shop full of men decided she probably couldn't handle the heavy work. He never made that mistake again. And every new hire who walked through Whitfield's doors after that got the same 2-sentence introduction from Dale himself, delivered without fail. "That's Mo. Don't ever assume you know what somebody's capable of just by looking at them, because some of the toughest people you'll ever meet are the ones who never bothered to tell you.